Hey friends, and welcome to the Girl Means Business podcast. I'm your host, Kendra Swalls, a photographer and educator on a mission to help you find your passion, power, and purpose through entrepreneurship. So let's jump right into today's episode because this girl means business. Hey guys, and welcome to episode 140 of the Girl Means Business podcast and the start of December. It is December 1st if you're listening to this episode live, which means we are into the last month of 2021. And it's crazy because I have to remind myself to say 2021, and here we are at the end of the year. I still feel like I'm in this weird time warp and it should still be 2020. But we're getting ready to head into the new year. And this is a really important time in business when a lot of us start thinking about either the final push for getting us into the end of the year, hitting goals we still want to hit before the year ends, or just kind of wrapping up a really busy season. Or maybe you're heading into 2022 ready to get the new year started, to really grow your business the next year, and you're wanting to make more money, hit certain goals, have a lot more sales. This episode is going to be perfect for you. So this week I'm chatting with Amanda Joyce Weber. She's a mindset and sales coach who helps online businesses struggling with their behind the scenes to cultivate the mindset they need to land clients and to make money on repeat. She takes the ick out of selling and demystifies what it takes to make money in your business so clients can truly thrive. Now you're going to notice a trend in a lot of the episodes we have coming up in the next few months. It's going to be a lot about mindset, about money mindset, about sales, about making money, because I want this to be the year that you have the best mindset around money. This is something that I have been working on a lot in my own life in the last couple of years and really diving into in the last few months, which is why you're probably going to hear a lot of these conversations coming up in the podcast. But it's definitely something that I think a lot of us are struggling with. And it's just this idea that money is either good, bad, not enough, too much, black and white. There's this weird mindset around it. And getting clear on what money really is and how it works in our business and how it works in our lives and what the root of all of it is in our own kind of ideas around it, I think is really, really important. So I know I'm rambling on about this, but I've seen it make changes in my own life and my own business. And I want to take everything I'm learning and share it and give it all to you. So that's why you're going to maybe have this topic kind of floating around the podcast for the next couple of months. Not every episode, but definitely will be kind of an underlying theme. So hopefully all the things that I am learning from this and all the changes that I've seen will help to inspire you and encourage you to start digging deep into your own mindset around money and sales. And so we're going to start off that today, and we're going to kick off the last month of 2021 with my conversation with Amanda Joyce Weber. I cannot wait for you to listen to this episode and dive into sales in your business. So let's get it going, starting right now. All right, guys, I am here with Amanda Joyce Weber. We're going to be talking all about sales today and the mindset around sales. I'm super excited to dive into this topic. I know it's something a lot of people struggle with. So Amanda, welcome to the Girl Means Business podcast. I am so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here.
Well, let's jump right in by talking about your story. So I introduced you a little bit at the beginning of the episode, but I want to hear your story and your journey of how you got to where you are today. I know you have kind of this interesting path that wasn't a direct path to where you are. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Totally. Yeah. So like you mentioned, I am a mindset and sales coach, and I love supporting women who feel like nothing is working behind the scenes to shift their mindset, own their expertise, gain visibility, and close sales on repeat so they can truly thrive in life and business. So I had a very windy path, as you mentioned. I started my first business in 2015 as a design studio. I had moved from New York City out to Denver, Colorado with my boyfriend, now husband, and really was looking for a fresh start. I had gotten so sick of city living. I had it with hauling my groceries back on the subway and living in my shoebox sized apartment. I had been long distance dating with my boyfriend, and I had this one night on the subway hauling my groceries back from Target where I said, this is not my forever plan. This is not going to work. And it really began this journey to finding what it was that I wanted and shifting my mindset and really believing that I could have what I wanted and that it was possible for me. So ultimately, I ended up moving out to Denver, Colorado, started my own design studio after I had had a bunch of red flag interviews in the Denver area, because I basically left my job at a big fashion brand in New York City, was fortunate enough to keep freelancing with that company, and figured I'd just, keep interviewing, find something when I moved out here. And the more I looked around, the more I found that I just did not want to jump right back into the long agency hours that a lot of those companies were, promoting. That was just the corporate culture in that industry. And it really began this path of finding what it was that I wanted. So I continued getting clients in my design business. I ran a successful design studio for 3+ years before my pivot to coaching. And that really started because I was noticing, it was amazing. I was landing like 10K web design projects. It was like on paper, it looked fantastic. And I was just noticing such a difference between people who would pay me 10K for a website and it would basically fall flat after, and people who would pay me 10K for a website and they would go on to get pilots on HGTV. They would have their products land in Anthropology. They would do these amazing things with their business. And I remember thinking there's got to be a way to support women further. There's got to be a way to really help people to have the life and business that they want. And I've always been really passionate about those two, having those two in conjunction. I think that, a lot of times you can have the life that you want and be absolutely freaking broke, or you can have the business and work yourself to the ground and be really freaking unhappy with the business. So it really is the combination between the two that creates that beautiful balanced life and successful, thriving business. So started in my design studio, decided that mindset was the missing link between the two, and started supporting women in the mindset to close more sales, the mindset to have that thriving business, the mindset to not have to sacrifice their life and their priorities to get there, and really just supporting them in making more money and growing their business. So that is the short version. That's probably the shortest I've ever told that story, but that's kind of how I ended up to where I am today.
I love that story. And I think, the mindset piece that we're going to get into today, I think is so important, because I see so many women, and not even just women, but people in general, but mostly women, who start a business because they are passionate about something or they're excited about something. And then the mindset piece of it and the imposter syndrome and all of these things. And especially I work a lot with moms, and the idea that I can't be a successful business owner and be a good mom. I have to choose one or the other. And if you have to choose, or you think you have to choose, you're going to go with being a mom, and their business falls off. And I think that there's so little emphasis put on getting your head in the right space before, or not even before you start, but in the process of building a business, that what you're doing is really valuable and so important. And I think it's something that a lot of people overlook. And so I love that you're putting that out there for women and helping them to overcome those limiting beliefs and those ideas that we're not good at something or not capable of something that we really are good at and capable of. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, that's amazing. But also that idea that it can be both, right? I think that that's a really important part of what you mentioned there. Is so often we think it has to be one or the other. It has to be, like you mentioned, being a mom or having the business or as I mentioned as part of my story, right? Like having the business, but that could like, can that actually come without sacrificing your life? Like that is such a ingrained belief in our culture is like, well, we have to pick one, right? And it can only be one. And I think some of the most important work that we can do is reprogramming that belief to say, actually, I can have both. I can have the life. I can have the business. And actually, it's a hell of a lot more profitable and fulfilling when I do have both.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you have been listening to the Girl Means Business podcast for any amount of time, then you know my love of email marketing runs deep. Not only is it a great way to generate new leads, but it's one of the most effective methods for nurturing warm leads and turning them into sales. Now, over the years, I've tested several email platforms, and my favorite by far is Flowdesk. Not only do they make email marketing simple and easy, even for the technically challenged, but they have everything you need to create stunning emails, capture leads, make sales, and automate the entire process, giving you time back in your busy day. And the cherry on top is you're only charged one flat fee no matter how many subscribers you have. So while other platforms will increase your price when you go over your pricing tier limit, Flowdesk has no price increases or hidden fees. If you're ready to give Flowdesk a try, click the link below in the show notes to save 50% off your first year. Let Flowdesk help you design emails people will love. Click the link below and check it out. I have a feeling you're going to love it just as much as I do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think that, there's so much that I could get into, but okay, let's focus on, as you were talking, I was like, oh man, we could go into a whole other different rabbit hole of this if we wanted to. But let's specifically kind of talk about the mindset that people have around sales, because that's such a big part of growing a business. You know, I see this a lot with the photography industry that I came from, where it's like, oh, I create beautiful photos, people are just going to come to me. Well, no, you have to put yourself out there. You have to sell your services. Or they create a product and they think, oh, if I put it out there, it's just going to happen.
Totally.
So I think one of the biggest struggles I see that a lot of women have around their business and sales is that they feel like that being a salesperson is something they're not good at. Whether it's because they feel like, oh, I'm just not like naturally a salesperson, or it's not something that like I was trained to do, so I'm not good at it. So they kind of just put that off in their business, like, oh, I'm not good at it, so I'm not going to do that part of it. I'm going to focus on other things. So what do you say to somebody who says like, I'm just not good at this?
I think this is like such an amazing parallel because you work with mothers, but I think it's so interesting to think about that through a different lens, right? So if you were to take that same thinking and apply it to motherhood, like, oh, I'm just not good at motherhood. Oh, like, I'm just not like, I'm going to focus on other things because I'm not good at it. It like, that would be wild, right? No one would actually say that. You're like, well, I'm going to make it work, right? Like, I'm going to figure this thing out. I know that I'm resourced enough. I know that I have the capabilities. I have that inner innate wisdom that says, yes, I can actually do this, right? So it's so interesting because sometimes I think we get so tripped up when it comes to business, but when you apply that very same thinking to other areas, it would be just like, that would be wild to say. So I think the shift here is really seeing it as like a muscle that you can cultivate, right? Or that's something that you can become good at over time, rather than thinking that it's that like either or thinking again, right? That like black or white thinking, that like it's nothing in between. And I think that honestly, there's a hell of a lot in between, like absolutely sucking at sales and being really good at sales, right? So I think that is just so helpful to see, because even if you don't feel like you're good at sales in this moment, there's still the potential to shift the underlying belief there and the underlying story. So even if you can't get to the belief that you are really good at selling, or you're someone who sells with ease, what is the next most believable thought that you can have so we can kind of stair step your way there? So Maybe you're in the process, like that story could be, I'm in the process of cultivating my skills when it comes to sales. I'm in the process of believing that I'm good at sales. I'm practicing selling because I know the more I sell, the more sales I make. Like, what is the next most believable thought? And from there, your mindset can warm up to the idea that is something that you are good at over time. But quite honestly, I think about the things that I've learned in my adult life. Like I learned to drive a car with like a stick shift, a manual transmission, like later in life. And it was because my boyfriend, now husband, and I shared a car, and it just became a necessity for me to learn. And I mean, when I first learned, I would stall that thing all the time. Like I was not good at it. I was constantly worried I was going to roll backwards down a hill into someone else's car, right? But it was by practicing, it was by allowing myself to be not good at it at first that I eventually learned to drive a stick shift. And now like I have my own car and it is a stick shift because it just became something that was no longer something I had to think about, but part of who I was. And that's kind of where we're aiming to get at when it comes to sales as well. To that point where it just feels so familiar that it stops being this thing that feels super uncomfortable and it just becomes part of how you run your business.
I love that idea, like the stair step thing, because I think that's so true. We all think, okay, well, I have to get from point A to point like Z in one hop. And that's just not the case. And I like that you parallel so many of these things to other aspects of our lives, because like I think about like just the idea of getting fit, like healthy and working out more. Like you're not going to go from not having stepped foot in a gym to being able to run 5 miles on a treadmill. You have to work your way up there. And the same thing applies to business. So I don't know why we have this hard time of being okay with the process in other areas. But when it comes to our business, we think, I have to have it completely done and figured out right now. Like we don't give ourselves the same grace that we do in other areas. So I think that's a really interesting concept and point that you've made, because I know I've fallen victim to that, where I've been like, I have to be really, really good at this thing before I can ever put it out into the world, or before I can ever like implement it in my business. Well, we don't do that with other things in our lives. Like, like the motherhood thing, like they don't just hand you a baby in the hospital and be like, okay, hope you figured this out already. Like you've had 5 minutes to figure it out. Like, no, we give ourselves that grace, or like the example with the car or just anything. Like we figure it out and we learn and we give ourselves permission to not be great at it right away, but yet we don't do that in our business. So that's a very interesting point you brought up.
And I think that's where so many people get caught with sales, is because they'll have one sales call that didn't convert, or it'll just be, heck, I probably had dozens of them before, if not more. Honestly, I don't know the exact number, but like I had so many sales calls that didn't convert. And most often that's the uncomfortable piece in the beginning, is sticking with it long enough to see it work, because that's where most people fall off, right? That's where most people go, well, sales calls don't work, so I must be doing something wrong. Everyone's talking about ease in their business. This doesn't feel easy, therefore it's not working. Like there is a period of time in learning anything, whether it's sales or like, something else completely, where practice is the thing. Repetition is the thing that makes it easier. But again, it's giving yourself that grace and permission along the way so you can get to that point. And I think that's such an essential shift when it comes to sales.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree. I mean, there's so many times that I know I've had that mindset in my business of, okay, well, it's not working. So that must mean that it's a failure and I need to just completely abandon it. And it's so funny that like, it's easy for me to recognize that in other people. When I'm coaching somebody, I'm like, no, you have to stick with it. It's like, again, going back to the analogy of the gym. You can't go into the gym one time and assume it's going to give you 6-pack abs. You have to keep working at it. I wish it worked that way.
Yeah, I know. Sign me up.
It was so great. But the same thing, like, you have to practice it, and you have to, and even I know I say this a lot, but like the idea that social media has kind of given us this skewed perception of what other people's businesses look like.
100%.
And I think that if you were to go and ask the people that you admire on social media, hey, how did your last 10 sales calls go? Or how did your last, 10 whatever perform in your business? You might think they're going to be like, oh, it was 100%. When really that's not the case. It might be that like 7 of the 10 converted or 5 of the 10 converted, but we only see those 5 that they put out there. They're not going to put out the 5 that didn't convert unless they, are wanting to prove a point. And so just the fact that like what we think needs to be 100% doesn't have to be 100% to be successful.
And I think the biggest difference there is not seeing that as like a deviation from running a successful business. Because again, that's where mindset will keep us stuck, is thinking because those 5 didn't convert, because they all had, mindset challenges around investing or whatever it was, that means that, I mean, goodness, you can go down a total rabbit hole there if you really want to, right? Like you can shift up offers, you can shift up price points, you can shift up, like you can change your entire business model based on those 5 people. Or you can say, no, I actually really believe that everything is completely fine here. And I'm going to continue on that path so I can get to those 5 that convert. So it's really about having that mindset and having that lens to stay in it long enough to see that happen. And really, I mean, don't get me wrong, that takes an incredible amount of support, right? Like it takes an incredible amount of support to stay in it, to stay in that discomfort, to see the results on the other side. But that's how you build a business overall, is not by shifting things up when it starts to feel uncomfortable, because essentially you're starting from scratch again there.
Yeah. And that's a whole other topic we can get onto about the idea that like, yeah, those 5 non-sales don't determine or shouldn't determine how you run your business. But yeah, that's a whole other topic for another
conversations.
I know. So, okay, getting back on track, let's talk about the idea too that a lot of people, even if they think like, okay, I can handle sales, I know I need to sell in my business in order to be successful, but the example of sales that I've had presented to me, whether it is because someone's selling to me or what I see on social media or what I see in email marketing, it all just feels so like icky and slimy. And I know you teach on this a lot about like taking the ick factor out. We have this sort of perception in our mind and in society as a whole that, oh, you have that used car salesman, mentality of like, oh, it has to be in your face, or that whole idea of like the hey girl messaging, the cold calling. And that's so not what sales can be or, has to be. So talk to that a little bit. Like, what are some ways that we can kind of shift that mindset of getting the ick factor out of sales so that we feel comfortable selling in our business and we can change the idea of how that looks in our business?
Totally. So I really believe that if you do not enjoy selling, you have not found a way to sell that feels good to you yet. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, because that just means that we get to find what works for you, which is actually an amazing opportunity. So I think that knowing that there is no one right way to sell can really relieve a lot of pressure around this, because I think so often where people get tripped up is thinking they have to have the perfect email funnel, and they have to be selling in the DMs, and they have to be having sales calls, and they have to be, doing all of these things and doing all these strategies that, one, don't necessarily feel good to them, or 2, they're not necessarily being strategic or consistent with. They're kind of just throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping to find one that works. And I think when you can really get clear on what would feel good to you, how do you actually want to sell? Some people love being on their phone and sending messages in the DMs and really connecting with potential clients there. Other people, that just doesn't feel good. Like, I happen to love sales calls. I did not always love sales calls. I used to break out in hives every single time. I'm not even kidding. Like it felt so uncomfortable to me, but eventually I just saw how well they worked, right? Like I saw how well they converted. I saw how easy it was for me to build that connection over sales calls. And that was what made me like them more. But I think that, again, that was a process. So I think one, finding a way to sell that feels good to you, getting clear on that strategy and sticking with it consistently so that you can actually see results is so key there. Because if you're trying sales calls one day and DMs the next and all the things, it's going to feel really difficult and you're going to feel like nothing's working when in actuality, you're just not being consistent with any one strategy. And then the second thing is just shifting your mindset around sales, which I mean, of course, is what we're here to do and here to talk about. But I think so often the reason that sales feels icky is because of one of two things. We either have had a previous experience where we've been sold to in a way that we didn't enjoy. We didn't feel in our power to say no. We didn't feel comfortable. And it just didn't feel good, right? So that's where the used car salesman idea comes in, right? And then two, we had an experience selling that was really freaking uncomfortable. And that's what made it feel icky. And that's what made it feel gross, right? So I think like if you can, this is such a great journal exercise. If you can get out your journal and think about what is your earliest memory around sales, it's super interesting to look at that because sometimes people will be like, oh, I remember, like personally, I remember going door to door selling wrapping paper when I was a kid. That was like the thing. And I cannot think of a product that grade school children would enjoy selling less than wrapping paper. Like it's not a thing, right? But I mean, I've had clients who felt really uncomfortable selling Girl Scout cookies or like whatever it was. And so often our association around sales is with a very early memory that we probably haven't even formed a conscious thought around yet. This is all running in the background of our subconscious. So just getting clear on what that earliest memory of sales is can be so helpful because then you can say, okay, these are all the thoughts that I had around that experience. And we get to flip the script. We get to say, okay, if this is how I currently feel around sales, how do I want sales to feel? Well, I want to feel like it's an even energy exchange. I want my potential clients to feel comfortable. I want people to see the value in what I have to offer. Like really get clear on how you want that to feel. And then think about how you can start weaving those pieces into the selling experience. How can you really make that part of how you approach sales? And from there, it's just going to feel so much better.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, photographers, are you ready to make 2024 your best year yet? Growing a business is tough. You're following all the successful photographers and experts, soaking up their best advice and downloading all their free guides, trying to replicate their success only to come up lacking, blaming yourself when their methods don't work for you. But the truth is, it isn't you. Free content and one-size-fits-all courses can only get you so far. What you need is personalized help and guidance, but that can get expensive. Well, not anymore. I've created the perfect solution to get you personalized results for less than $2 a day. Introducing the Focus Photographer Lab, a one-of-a-kind coaching membership that gets you one-on-one results for a fraction of the cost of traditional coaching. Inside the lab, you'll find the 3 C's to success: classes, coaching, and community. With classes, you gain access to a treasure trove of pre-recorded trainings and invaluable resources. With coaching, you get monthly live trainings and Q&A sessions, along with my favorite part, the weekly one-on-one office hours, where we get to address your unique questions and challenges. And then there's the community, where you get to connect with an amazing group of talented female photographers who share your passion, supporting each other and inspiring each other to greatness. The best part is it doesn't come with an expensive one-on-one coaching price tag. You get all of that for just $47 a month. You can even try it for free for 14 days to make sure it's a good fit for you. And there is no contract and no obligation. You can cancel at any time. So what are you waiting for? Head down to the show notes and click the link to learn more and get signed up today. And let's make 2024 our best year yet.
All right. So I love that journal exercise I was writing it down as you were talking about it, because I think that's such a great thing to go back. And I talk about this a lot too, about just the idea that our childhood impacts so much about like who we are as adults, and we don't give that enough credit. And when you were saying about Like, what's the earliest memory you have of sales? Like, my first thought went to Girl Scout cookies. And I know you mentioned that, but I always think about like, well, that was easy because who doesn't love Girl Scout cookies? You know, like you're going to your family and your friends, you're like, hey, would you want some delicious cookies? Well, yeah, of course you do. And so it didn't feel like it was this challenge to sell cookies. But for whatever reason, now when you take like what you do as a business and you think, oh my gosh, it's so scary to go and like talk about this thing because it feels like you're pushing something on somebody when really it's like you're just offering them something that they might enjoy as much as they would these Girl Scout cookies. So like there really isn't that much of a difference, but for whatever reason, we take it in our minds and we turn it into something so much scarier than what it really, what it really is. So totally. I love that idea. Yeah. So I love it. And I love having exercises like that, like that people can go and actually like start working on. So a question I thought of when you were talking too was, you mentioned like the different sales, like whether it's in DMs or sales calls or in person or in email. So do you have like a way to kind of figure out like how to figure out what works best for your business? Because I think there are so many different ways and people get in this mindset of like, okay, well, so-and-so says that I should be doing sales calls. So I have to do sales calls or it just isn't going to work for my business. Or this person over here says I should be doing it, this way. So do you have like a system or a way to help people figure out like what really is best for their business?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that it definitely comes down to what feels best to you. I think that every strategy works if you stick with it, if you work it consistently, if you practice enough to give it that breathing room it needs to actually take off. I am personally a huge fan of sales calls because I think that nothing will build that relationship faster than getting on a call with someone. And I think that is really what you're looking to do in the sales process. So there is so much noise in the online industry. There, like you said, there are like infinite strategies out there. And because of that, I think that it's led to a lot of confusion and it's led to a lot of this kind of like underlying idea or feeling that like you just don't know how to get clients or you just don't know how to sell. And because of that, everyone has like their 40-step sales process or their blueprint or whatever it is. And it's led to this belief that sales has to be this really complicated thing. And I just like to bust through that myth entirely because I think that sales is actually really simple. I think marketing is really simple and I think sales is really simple. And that because of all of this noise, our brains have been led to believe that it's actually far more complicated than it is. So let's break that down for a second here, because in a weird way, it's answering your question. So when it comes to sales, I really think that there are like three parts of the client relationship, right? There's initiating that relationship, there's nurturing that relationship, and there's transforming that relationship. So when you are initiating that relationship, this is the first point of contact you have with someone. So typically that could look like your Instagram posts. It could look like them stumbling upon your podcast. It could look like a post you did in a Facebook group. It could be reaching out to someone personally that you really enjoy the content they put out. Whatever it is, you're initiating that relationship in some way. Now, the same way you wouldn't go on a date and then expect to get married right after that first date, there's probably going to take some nurturing and relationship building in between. So that looks like continuing to put out podcast episodes, continuing to put out content, continuing to, nurture that relationships in conversation, whatever that looks like for you. And then there is a point where you're going to want to transform that relationship. And not every relationship is a sales relationship, right? So same way, not every date you go on is going to be that person you want to marry. It just doesn't happen that way. And that's okay. But I think that that's really that point at which you do invite someone to a sales call, or you do say, hey, I support around this a lot. I think this program would be a really good fit for you. Can I send you a link? That is the point at which you're really transforming that relationship from a potential client into a paid client. So just having that sort of framework, I think, is incredibly helpful, because then you can see where it is that you might be missing the mark. And sometimes that looks like that nurturing piece, right? People will put out content once and they'll be like, but no one's buying. And it's like, yeah, because I mean, a third of your audience, maybe not even, actually saw what you were selling. And most of the modern research shows they have to see it like 17 times to actually take action on it, which is wild, right? So sometimes it's just a frequency problem, but maybe you're not initiating that relationship either. Maybe you have tons of relationships and you're never transforming them from potential clients to paying clients. So just being able to see it from that perspective, I think is incredibly useful. Because then when you look at your strategy and you know that every strategy works, right? It's not like, selling in the DMs has clearly worked, right? Getting on sales calls has clearly worked, right? Our brains can find evidence for all of those things. So we know they work. It's just about what actually is going to feel good for you. What can you give enough energy and focus toward to allow it to work? And are you actually focusing on the correct part of your sales process so that you can see that all the way through? Does that help?
No, I think that's really good. I was writing things down as you were talking because I love what you said too about like looking back and going, okay, wait a minute. It's not just that I posted this one time and nobody bought. Where can I go back and find the missing piece? Like, am I really putting out the frequency? Am I really like the frequency problem I thought was really important because so many times we think that, oh, I posted this and nobody purchased from it. It must mean it's a bad product or it must mean it's not, it's not good. When really like, yeah, no, people need to see and hear something a bunch of times before they're ready to buy from you. And that's why like I personally, for me, I'm going to use Instagram as an example here. So I post a lot to my Instagram stories and I'll put up like questions and polls or I'll put out little things. And it's not necessarily that I'm looking for, sometimes I'm looking for feedback, but also I'm looking just to start a conversation with people. And I have like these DM conversations that go on for a long period of time where they're just responding to my Instagram stories multiple times, whether it's just a reaction of like, a little heart or a thumbs up, or they're commenting saying like, oh my gosh, yes, that's so funny. Or I totally agree. And not that's building this relationship. Like you said, like, yeah, the content I put out was what got them in the door, but continuing to respond to their reactions and being like, yeah, wasn't that so funny? Or, oh my gosh, yes, I can relate. Like this happens to me all the time. Like how many times does this happen to you or whatever? Those little touch points are all leading up to, then it becomes so much easier for me to say, hey, I noticed you've been talking about struggling with X, Y, or Z. I've got this really great podcast episode that might be great for you to listen to. And then it's not about me saying like, hey, buy this thing from me. It's about me saying, hey, let me help you solve this problem with this product or service that I have. And that makes it so much easier. So I love that you've broken it down into the fact that it's not just about, is my sales call working or is, my DM or my email messaging right? It's about all the things leading up to that, and I think for some people that might sound like a lot, but it's really not. Like it's so much simpler than we make it out to be in our heads.
Totally. Yeah. And I think the reason we think it's complicated is because of those fears that bubble up as well, right? So it's often like I really believe the actions themselves are the easy part. It's all of the thoughts we have around the actions that make them so much more difficult to take. So for example, you sending that podcast episode over, that probably takes you 2 seconds because in your head, you go, oh my gosh, this would be the perfect episode for that person. Let me shoot them a link. But I can also appreciate that, like, I know way back when I pivoted my business, I would have overthought that decision times a million, right? I would have been like, oh, well, they don't actually want that. They won't find it helpful. I didn't really explain that clearly. It would be all of those fears and doubts and limiting beliefs that make the action itself that much more difficult to take, right? And that's where mindset really comes into play here, because when we can understand, hey, the action isn't that hard. Like I just shoot them a podcast episode that I think they'll like and get value from. That takes 2 seconds. But when we're like, oh, should I send her that podcast episode? I don't know. Maybe that it's something that's on your to-do list for 5 days before you work up the courage to do it. And that's where we can hold ourselves back so much, because the mindset is the piece that's holding us back from selling, not necessarily the action of selling itself. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. And that's one of the things I think, is so difficult is we make up this whole story in our head of what this person's going to think about whatever message we put out there or whatever we say to them on this call, when it's not necessarily true. We're creating this false reality that we think is going to happen, when in reality, that's not how it actually could play out. And the other thing too, I think, is remembering that it's not selling if you're solving a problem for somebody. Like the example I gave of me giving them the podcast episode. Well, they don't have to know that in that podcast episode, I'm talking about a product I offer as well and how that can help them. All they see is here's somebody who's helping me, give me a resource that can help me with a problem that I've put out there that I have, or that they've noticed that I have. And so I think a lot of times in our heads, we build up this thing of oh my gosh, I'm putting this out there and I'm going to, annoy people with it because it's X, Y, or Z or whatever. When really, if you change that to, I have this service or this product that can help solve a problem these people have, I need to get it in front of as many people as possible because I want to help them. Then it now becomes not about selling, but about serving. And when you can change that from I'm not selling, I'm serving, I think that's when things really start to take off. And that's when things become less intimidating for people, like you were saying. But I want to go back to the idea of that frequency problem. I hear so many people say all the time, well, I don't want to be that annoying person who's always talking about their product or their service. So how do you help people to find that balance? Or what do you say to someone who's well, I don't want to be annoying, but I know I need to get that frequency up, so that people know what I'm offering and it's out there in the world. So how do we find that balance so that we're not, not withholding our information, but we're also not feeling like we're posting about it every 5 seconds?
Well, I think a part of that question really stems from this almost belief that we think that we're doing something wrong when it comes to selling. And I think that that's really the hang up here. That's really the mindset thing that I want to shift. And I think you touch on it so beautifully when it comes to thinking of it more as serving. But I would also really encourage you just to think about it you're always selling. If you have a business, you are always selling because that is what you're here to do. So part of it, I think, is just releasing the stigma around that, because there's no shame on that. If you think about it, I think it feels so intensely personal, again, because it's you and your business. But if you were to think about it in the context of something else, no one is walking into Starbucks surprised that they're going to sell them a coffee, right? That's just not a thing that happens. And no barista in Starbucks is apologizing for, oh my gosh, I might try to sell you a latte today. It's just not a thing that happens. And I think when you can think about it through that lens, it's so obvious you're just running a business. But when it feels so intensely personal, when your friends and family are watching, when you feel maybe that self-doubt creeping in about your business, that's when we start feeling oh my gosh, maybe I'm posting too frequently. Maybe I'm talking about this too much. Maybe I shouldn't do this. But honestly, your friends and family are probably going to be your early adopters just because they know you and they already have that know and trust factor with you. So I think just the shift of thinking of that as a good thing rather than something you have to hide or not talk about too much, I think is super valuable there. And I think that, free will also comes into play here. No one is if people don't like what you're saying or they think you're talking about your business too much, they're probably not your ideal client and they can just unfollow. It's a click of a button, unfollow, unsubscribe, literally a click. So I think just remembering that anyone who's following you is there because they want to be there is a really powerful shift, because then it means that you can stand in your truth. You can talk about your business. You can talk about how you can help your ideal clients without that idea that you're bothering anyone, because again, they're there because they decided to be there. And the second they decide they don't want to be there, that's okay too. And they can leave. So I think just seeing it as something that they are making a choice around rather than something you're like imposing on someone against their will is really valuable there.
Oh yeah. I love the idea of the Starbucks example. That's so true. Like, yeah, we don't go into Starbucks to get mad at them because they, are like, oh, would you like to have a muffin today too? Like, I'm not like, oh no, I can't believe you tried to sell me a muffin at Starbucks. Like, that's so ridiculous. But that's so true. Like, I think about, I keep going back to Instagram because that's my primary outlet there. But
totally,
if someone's following me, it's very clear that I am a business and this is what I do. I mean, that's obviously, I talk about that a lot. Like, you need to make it very clear who you serve and how you serve them. And so, yeah, if someone's following you, they're not following you just because they're like, oh, maybe someday she'll offer all of this incredibleness for free and never try to sell me anything at all. Like, they know, like, I follow people knowing they're going to try to sell me something. And that's okay, because I don't think twice about it when they come at me and they're like, hey, I've got this really amazing product I just created that might help you solve this problem or make this easier for your life. I'm like, yes, give it to me. Let me see what you have. And then I can make the decision to say yes or no. And so, yeah, the free will piece of it too, like, we're not forcing people, into a room and going, you have to buy from me. They have the option to say no. And we have to understand, like, that's going to happen. Like, you're going to have people say no to you, and that's okay. Like, the barista at Starbucks knows not everybody's going to buy a muffin as well. Like, they're going to either buy a coffee or, but some of them are going to, and that's great. But if you don't, that's fine too. And so, yeah, like, just taking that pressure off of ourselves of being like, every single person we talk to has to buy from us or we're doing something wrong. Like, that's not how that works. And I think, again, like, the mindset piece of why do we find it acceptable for people in a brick and mortar store to sell to us? Like, I know, like, when I walk in, there's a little boutique in town that I always go and buy, like, they have really cute shirts and outfits and shoes every fall and stuff and boots and whatnot. And when I walk in there, like, I know the first thing they're going to do is tell me, here's what's on sale. And is there anything I can help you find? What are you shopping for today? Or, they're going to be like, oh, we got this really cute new thing in today. Do you want to see it? That does not bother me in the least. So why do we feel like that when we go onto Instagram and say, hey, look at this really great new product I'm putting out into the world. Look how amazing this is, that we all of a sudden feel like it's an inconvenience for people, or we're imposing on their scrolling time or whatever, like, we have to break that mindset that just because we're not this brick and mortar shop, or we're not, this huge conglomerate company, that we can't put our things out there and that we're imposing on people all of a sudden.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You love listening to podcasts, but have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you want to build a brand, grow your business, or are looking for an excuse to talk about your favorite hobby. Whatever your reason for making a podcast, Buzzsprout is the place to start. Since 2009, Buzzsprout has helped over 300,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout walks you step by step through the whole process and will give you powerful tools to start, grow, and monetize your podcast. Ready to get started? Click the link in the show notes to get our free step-by-step guide to starting your podcast today.
I think another interesting thing that came up for me there is typically when that happens, you pull back on the action, right? So if you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm annoying people. Let's say you post about a new offer. You feel like no one's really liking, no one's engaging, no one's commenting. You get super uncomfortable. You pull back on that. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's not working. I'm going to stop posting because I have this story that I'm annoying people, right? That is when your results are dictating your actions, which is a really uncomfortable place to be. And it's super interesting, again, when we look at the context of bigger businesses, because like if Chipotle has a bad quarter, they're not pulling down all the billboards because they had a bad quarter. If anything, they're going harder on that messaging. They're doing more to market. They're getting it out there and in front of the right people. Like they're saying, what can we shift? How can we get it in front of more people? Like they're being super strategic, but it's not from a pulling back on sales perspective, sales and marketing perspective. It's on a how can we do more perspective, right? So I think just seeing that like total like almost like the opposite of what our like gut says that we should do in that instant is actually like going deeper to get more results, doing more to get more results rather than less. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. Yeah. Okay. I could talk about this all day long. And like I said, there's so many different like things, like different avenues we could go down on this topic. So I want to kind of wrap up with a final question. And that is like when somebody is starting a business, so somebody who's kind of new to the idea of, okay, I have this business. I'm going to have to put myself out there. This is something that's out of my comfort zone. It's something that I'm still like learning how to do, and kind of going back to the idea that like, you're not going to start off being perfect at it yet. What would be sort of the like start off, like number one piece of advice you would give to somebody around the idea of mindset and sales?
Yeah, totally. So I would say nothing is harder than selling when you don't know what you're selling. So I think that clarity piece is so incredibly important. And not only do you need that clarity, but you need that consistency too. So the way that you become known for something is by talking about it clearly and consistently. And at the point at which you feel like a broken record, you have probably only scratched the surface of talking about it enough. So I think that is really the most important piece. Get clear on the results that your people want. Talk about those results. Really like get clear on that so you can communicate it consistently, because that is how marketing works. And that is ultimately what leads to sales.
Okay, that led me to one more thing I want to ask you. See, I told you this is the problem. I'm going to keep going. I will stop myself, I promise. But the idea, like you hear the term a lot, elevator pitch. And it kind of is one of those things where like some people love it, some people hate it. But I think it goes back to what you just said of getting very clear on like what the results are that people can expect from working with you or buying or purchasing from you. And so what is your kind of take on the whole idea of having an elevator pitch? Like, do you think that's something people need to kind of perfect and maybe even like clarify like what it is, but just the idea of like knowing very quickly how to communicate what it is that you do? Do you have any tips on like figuring out how to kind of curate that or create that little, I don't even like the term elevator pitch, but like creating that little like, you know, blurb of like, here's what I offer and here's how it helps you. Like, how do you create that?
Yes, totally. So I call it a core message just because that feels good to me, but same thing, right? Like you can use whatever term here it feels good to you. But I really dislike formulas, but like I have a formula that can help with this basically. And it's basically like, hi, I'm, and insert your name. And then I support who you support, who feel like, so the problem that they are currently experiencing, the problem that they're like, oh my gosh, I really just want to sign my next client, whatever it is, like whatever problem you help solve for your people. So who feel like, for me, it's like women who feel like nothing is working behind the scenes. 2, and then talk about that result and transformation that you offer, right? So that's that result piece we just talked about here. And this is the part where people get so uncomfortable because they're like, oh my gosh, but like, I don't want them to think that like every person gets this result and sometimes it looks different. And it's all like, everyone needs to take a deep breath. It's all fine. But like, what is the result that is possible for your person? What is the result that you aim for? What is it that they most desire? That's the result you want to speak to. And I think that flow can just help so much because that really paints the picture of the transformation that you offer, also helps you to get clear on your core message, and also helps you to speak to why people should buy from you.
Yeah. Okay. I like that little formula because I've done very similar, like when I help people kind of get their Instagram bio, like that little tagline sort of, it's along those same lines. And I think that it's really helpful to kind of have almost like that, plug and play structure of, okay, this is who I help to do X, Y, and Z. Like for me, it's, I help mompreneurs to balance business life and mom life to be more productive without the overwhelm. And that kind of, it gives you like, this is who I'm helping. This is what I'm helping you to do. And this is, kind of the result you're going to get is you're going to be more productive and less overwhelmed. But it can be done in a way that doesn't feel like, again, like you're pitching yourself to somebody. It's just, this is what I do. Because I think that's a problem a lot of, entrepreneurs have is like, I know I struggled in the beginning when I left my teaching career is when someone say, well, what is it that you do? And you're kind of like, well, I answer emails and I record a podcast. But being able to have that kind of clear, concise statement is super helpful. So thank you for giving us that little framework. I appreciate it.
Totally.
All right. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for your time and your patience and giving us all this incredible value and information and like actionable steps we can go and put into practice in our business. So tell everybody where they can find you if they want to follow you or learn more about you or work with you. And I know you have a free offer for everybody as well. So share that with us.
Yes, absolutely. So you can come hang out with me over on Instagram at Amanda Joyce Weber. That is my absolute favorite place to hang out. You can also, if you love today's podcast, you can check out the One Simple Shift podcast, where we talk about simple shifts like the one we talked about today, where you can really shift your mindset and create the beautiful, balanced life and successful, thriving business that you desire. So you can check that out over on One Simple Shift, wherever you listen to podcasts. And then also I have a free audio about really working through those mindset challenges around sales so that you can bust through them and strategically shift them and really just sell in a way that feels good so you can close more of them and make more money in your business. So you can head over to AmandaJoyceWeber.com. It's right at the top of the homepage. Can't miss it. And opt in there.
Perfect. And I'll have all of that linked, including the little freebie there linked on the show notes so people can just easily click down there and head over there. So Amanda, again, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. And I cannot wait to chat with you again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And as always, you can find any links or resources mentioned in today's show down in the show notes. And if we're not friends outside the podcast yet, then what are you waiting for? Come find me on Instagram at Girl Means Business. Send me a DM letting me know what you thought of today's episode or any of the past episodes you've listened to. You can also take a screenshot of today's episode and post it to your stories, tagging at Girl Means Business, and I'll give you a shout out on my page. I love connecting with you and hearing all about your business and can't wait to get to know you more. I hope you have a wonderful week and I will meet you back here next week, same time, same place.